recognizing the fact that you are representing 3,900 residents, or 12,000 residents, 3,000 homes. It's a shame you don't have more representation. Anyway, I'm Brian Regret. Some of you know me, and I'm just glad to be here, part of the Marketing and Communications Committee for Brander Mill. And this evening, we're going to hear from our distinguished, what would you call them? People applying for job of candidates. And all I can think of is, when you know how much they do, why would you want the job? Right? But thank you for being here tonight. We're going to just do this. I'm going to ask a couple of questions. I've been handed a few, but we've got a microphone here that after we do some introductions, if you have questions directly from me, want to ask directly, we want you to do that when the time comes. And in the meantime, we're going to start with each of our three candidates. We're going to give them about 2 minutes or so to just introduce themselves and tell them why they're running. So we're going to start with Anderson. Tell us about yourself and why you're running for the board.
Hey, I'm Anderson Dadu. I moved to Brander Mill in 2019, and I'm running for a position on the board because I've fallen in love with Brander Mill. I've got a young family, and as many of you know, Brander Mill has become a very attractive place for young families to move to. And I can really foresee myself living here for the next 30, 40 years, having a great time with my neighbors, with my friends, and partaking in the community. And I'd love to be someone that can help champion the future of what this neighborhood's going to be. And I feel that starts with the board and starts with being part of the voice of the community. And that's a little bit about why I'm interested. So thank you all for having me.
Thank you.
Okay. Greg?
Good evening, thank you all for coming here. So my name is Greg Allen, and I'm running a lot because of my history. I started off in Charlotte, North Carolina as a young professional, but immediately found that I wanted to be involved in the community of Charlotte. And so I got involved as a community advocate in Charlotte, North Carolina. Actually started a neighborhood organization for the Chantilly Neighborhood Organization. 650 inner city homes that needed a lot of effort to turn it around. It was really failing. That gave me a really strong understanding of how much I love finding solutions to the problems that impact communities. When a job came open in Chesterfield County for someone who could relate to neighborhoods as well as manage the development, they looked at my resume and said, wow, this guy used to design development and he also represented neighborhoods and communities all across Charlotte. I think you'd be a good fit. And sure enough, I spent 30 years here, not just managing development, but working with neighborhoods to solve a lot of problems that Chesterfield was having. Now, I retired last summer, and many of you probably understand. I retired because what I saw happening in Chesterfield was there was no one out there challenging the forces that are changing Chesterfield so rapidly. And I felt like, here, I have all this experience. Why don't I retire and run, for Board of Supervisors? Fine, I didn't win, but I got 13% of the vote between Republicans and Democrats as an independent. And I changed the discourse of that election. To me, that was valuable. So I decided just to extend that opportunity with all my experience and my desire to serve neighborhoods, that I would run for this board of directors for Brander Mill. So I have interacted with the board of directors when I was working in Chesterfield County numerous times. I helped organize the neighborhoods along the 360 corridor to improve the standards of how 360 would look. And so I feel like I understand the Brander Mill board of directors very well. I understand the way they're set up with FSR and why that benefits us. So I'm certainly willing to take any challenges on questions about FSR and the BCA because I do understand how they work together and sometimes how they fail, understandable. But I am happy to be here if I don't get elected. If any of you have seen my work, I am standing as a community advocate for neighborhoods across Chesterfield because they need someone to support them in the efforts that are, in the powers that are coming out of them. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Tony?
I want to thank everybody who's here tonight. Some of you may have very busy schedules, and I know sometimes it's a task to get to a 6 p.m. meeting. I'm Tony Giordano. I've lived here since 1981. I've been in the same house since 1982. Was involved in the community with the youth programs from 85 to 2000. My children got a little bit older. I then was on the BCA Board of Directors for 4 years in 2002 to 2006. And from 2006 to 2018, I never read anything at all about the BCA, other than I voted once a year. And then about 5 or 6 years ago, there was a little bit of turmoil in regards to community management. And I started to get a little bit more involved. I wound up being a participant on the documents committee, and we made our first presentation to the public this year, about a month and a half ago. And based upon some questions that people asked me after the meeting, I decided maybe I would run again. So that's why I'm here tonight. I'm doing it willingly. All of my children grew up here. I've obviously lived here for 40 years. And I love Brandonville. This Brandonville is changing, and a lot of things around us are changing. And maybe I have a little different perspective because I have some of the historical background and knowledge of what happened in the 80s and 90s that got us to where we are today. So once again, thank you all for attending.
Gentlemen, thank you. I know that most of you probably seen little videos or read about our candidates in advance, so we've got an introduction. I have some questions here that have been submitted, and then we're going to open it up to the floor, okay? So one of the questions that came via an email was to ask you tonight, and I see I have another one here that's been already offered to me. I think it comes in the same area. And it has to do with the fact that we have a lakefront property and we have common areas with lake homes, and that it often looks as if some of the homes have appropriated all the land all the way down to the water. And the question that's being asked is that what should the BCA be doing, or the board do, with respect to, I'm going to read this here, to prevent homeowners from deterring others from enjoying lake view and access to the water. What would you do for the 95% of homeowners who don't own waterfront homes to get better access to all common areas around the lake, to walk pets, provide access for paddleboarders and fishermen, and to improve access to families who want to walk along the shore and enjoy the water's beauty and sunsets without confrontation? Anderson, let's start with you.
I'm so glad to hear that people are concerned about such a topic, because the biggest draw that Brandonville has is access to the reservoir. Beautiful. It's one of the things that attracted me to buying a home here in Brandonville. And I'm lucky to have access that is not secluded. It is via Waterside Park. I live on the northern side of Brandonville, so I access it from the backside through Cove Ridge. And one of the things that I've experienced through my time here, biking the trails, walking around and seeing some of these properties, is that its accessibility is what really I think is the biggest challenge to overcome. How many people are aware of where is an accessible place for those homeowners that have that access, and for those homeowners that have the ability to, let's say, commandeer incorrectly, or at least feel compelled and a sense of ownership to that property. They can see it out of their backyard every single day. I would feel very, attached to it as well. That Brandonville as a community and the people leading the organization should identify, well, first, what can be done with that area. Certainly if it's only accessible by kayak, or if it's only accessible by boat, or if it's only accessible by some sort of water means, it doesn't mean that the majority of people are going to be able to access it. And I don't think anyone wants to have folks walking through their backyard to get to some sort of common ground in that way. But for the other areas that are accessible by trail or by or through the neighborhood or by some sort of other means that is connected to a common area. We should first focus on giving people the knowledge of the resource, whether that's through maps, access, knowledge. And then Brandermill should also invest a little bit of time into beautifying that space so it can be used. We know the flora and the fauna is very prevalent in our neighborhood. We want to maintain the integrity of what the ecosystem needs. And at the same time, we want to make sure that the use of those areas is being done in a responsible and ethical way. So fishermen hopefully aren't leaving behind their trash. People who are using boats aren't being obstructive to the neighbors that live in those areas, if such a thing exists. And more importantly is, at the end of the day, it's shared space, right? We're all paying for it in one way or another through our taxes, through our dues, and of course through our residency here. So as long as we're continuously investing in what's possible, I think that would be the biggest focus, find out how people want to use it, and then we come up with a strategy of how to execute on that in a ecologically safe way.
Greg, respond to that?
Anderson, I like your response. I think it adds a lot to the conversation. I'm going to take a totally different aspect of this, which you didn't speak to, but which I have heard as a candidate. So there's this argument going on between those who have boat docks along the lakefront versus those who feel like, well, why do they get this special consideration to have that when it's common space for all? I'm not aware that any of the homeowners who live along the lake are actually interfering with those who are enjoying the walkways. If that's an issue, that's another whole matter. But I would like to consider those property owners who live along the lake. They paid the most, they pay the highest taxes and so forth, and they get to enjoy that view. But they also have to share that view and that presence with literally everyone else in the community who walks in front of them with their pets. So in a way, it's a shared view. And so again, I look at what's the equality here, and I say, you know what, if there happens to be a dock and a small boat for that homeowner along the lake, I think that's not a bad trade for all the people who actually still get to enjoy walking past those houses and enjoying the lake view. Maybe that's a different perspective from a lot of others, but I am not a lake owner. I'm back in Timber Ridge, and I enjoy that walk past the lake quite often. I do appreciate that we've established a boaters committee that can bring in some new viewpoints. I think transparency from all viewpoints is necessary. If I have not spoken fully from the non-frontage owners, I would hope to hear from that too. But I do think that there is a common approach that can be a win-win for everyone.
Tony?
Well, first of all, I have a conflict of interest because I do live on the lake. And, but I also, to the best of my knowledge, had the first Board of Supervisors approved dock that went into the reservoir in 2012. I've had a pontoon boat since 1987. At that time, you could have a pontoon boat behind your house, but you couldn't tie it up on the open space, which meant you could let you put a buoy out in the pond reservoir and you tie it up. Well, Wood Lakes is totally different. So ultimately, in the early 90s, the board allowed that you could start to put pontoon boats behind your house and you could tie them up to the trees behind your boat or behind your house. There were maps that the BCA put out for years that showed all the bike trails, all the access points to get to the waterfront. I really have not seen any of those in about 5 to 8 years, but they were very, very good. A place like right here should have access to the waterfront. It does along the side there, but because of the trend in the past few years, and I mentioned this in a prior meeting, the concept was for low maintenance, not no maintenance. And the community association has a responsibility to try to maintain their common properties to the level that they expect you, the homeowner, to maintain your property. And sometimes they haven't seen that in the past 20 years. I do agree that everybody should be able to enjoy the waterfront. I do also agree with Greg that the people that live along the water pay a little bit more for their property for the pleasure of looking out at the lake. And BCA 10 years ago, 5 years ago, approved people putting docks behind their properties. I think there's like, I don't know, 150, 200 docks down the reservoir. Passing retroactive rules, I think, is not a good idea. But I do agree, everybody should have access to the waterfront. And we just need to make sure we maintain those trails. Don't let them get crowded over with overgrowth that no one would want to walk through. I mean, that's my, just feeling everything.
I just had a follow-up question. Are you saying that the BCA isn't currently approving docks on the reservoir?
No.
Because it sounded like you were saying that.
No, I'm not saying no. I'm just saying they, retroactively, you can't deny something you approved 10 years before. That's what I meant to say.
Okay, I'm on the ARB and we're not retroactively denying anything, so
No,
I
I'm
just
just,
thought I should clarify that.
but they're coming out with new rules and guidelines that they want the existing people to have, which are different than what were 10 or 15 years ago. I can speak to you in private about this.
Yeah, they're county rules, so.
Okay.
Okay, you want to ask a question?
Yeah, both of y'all made comments about the, I guess, the common area between the homeowners on the water and the water. How about the common area between two homes that's lakefront? And I'll use myself as an example. I have 43 foot of common area directly in front of my house, which actually gives me water view when I'm out on the water. But I'm subject to, a lot of times, the two homeowners want to maintain that property, I say, what they think is best. I saw two teenagers go and knock on their door to get permission to get in the water, which they should not have had to do, because there's 43 feet of common area they could have gone into, but they thought it was private property. And one of them even has a boat dock right there, which does not fall within the hazard behind the house. So, you know, you got a couple of things going on, which I'm like, you know, I kind of agree with that, where you go like, the young people in the community walk right by and don't even know that it's a common area. People walking their dogs in the blistering heat or snow or something, walk your dogs up down the grass. Don't have them right down that, you know, pavement, but it's not known. And I assume that's not my situation, it's not the only situation around like that.
May I?
Yes.
I think one of the ideas that I'm hearing in a manner that's hopefully forward-looking for a situation like that is, I think of fair usage in any type of park situation. There might be a gazebo or a picnic area. It's open for all. And sometimes people can reserve them for a birthday party or a gathering of some sort. And to me, it's kind of akin to a similar situation where folks want to be able to have fair use, but they don't know how to use it. And part of the challenge is that our layout in Brandermill, common area and private area, has the same trees, has the same foliage, has the same, layout. So it's very easy to commonly mistake it. I don't think we want to set a trend of people assuming what's public or common and what is private. So we definitely have to figure out a strategy around what's the best way to mark those areas. So it kind of calls back to what I think the three of us were mentioning earlier, which is if we're going to lean in a direction that's going to improve the experience, then I think there needs to be a little bit of ownership on who's maintaining that common area, which would be the BCA, to properly identify and mark those areas. Now, whether that's through maybe some sort of unique edging, maybe there's some sort of elegant and simple signage, that's not obstructing anything, and we certainly don't want to do anything that's tacky, right? Something that people will deface or possibly create an additional cost for us to maintain year over year. And we want to make sure that the experience is also reflective of what homeowners show in pride of ownership. They might have an idea of what looks best to them, but it's common area, so it needs to look best to what the collective of the group wants to do. And I think if those people are so willing to want to partake in beautifying an area, then we should maybe have some sort of volunteerism event where they can properly document, get an approval for what they want to do, submit it, and if everyone agrees on it, we move forward. Otherwise, it's got to be purely on the BCA to say this is the common ground, belongs to everyone. We've got to make a decision on that.
May I say something? Craig, you want to respond to that?
Yes, I'd like to add to what Anderson. Again, this is going to see kind of a pattern, I think, here that we probably all think very much alike. So it's going to be a hard decision on who to vote for. But I'll keep coming back to transparency. You know, making decisions that everyone understands how we're moving forward is a big part of this story. So this voters committee that's being formed for at least a year, they need to respond with what they believe they want to have accomplished and the goals that they have. But yet we don't have necessarily a committee of non-frontage residents coming up with what they think is important for that view, and that we might.
The committee has to have 3 non-voting people on it.
Good, that's good information. Anyway, the end result is that there's likely going to be some compromises or negotiations where the proper care and beautification of that common area along those pathways probably needs to be upgraded. Okay? It's probably not meeting the standards that Brandon Mill should be having along this lakefront to protect the water quality as well as the views. But at the same time, you know, the boat owners can feel somewhat protected if they're not going to be retroactively have something taken away. And they will understand the rules that they have to live by, and we get to that point where, again, everyone says, this is reasonable, let's move forward. So it's a really good question.
Yeah, I think what you're talking about, like the common areas that aren't quite on the water, but
Well, it goes to the water.
water access.
Yeah, you got some.
In some of these places, small bike trails potentially could be put in with signage at the street, a relatively non-obtrusive sign, so people can see it, because you're indicating that there's a lot of, well, it's kind of hard to tell what's common property, open space from somebody's side lawn in some areas. So I think we need to do a better job of demarcating those areas, maybe some more bike trails to get from point A to point B. I know that from here, the next community down, there's bike trails along the riverfront for 2 or 3 neighborhoods. But when you get to the last neighborhood, Shallowford, the bike trails come through the parking lot and they go through the medians. They go through the cul-de-sacs, not between the houses and the road. But yeah, I think that needs to be addressed, and some improvements probably need to be made.
While you're talking in this area, I'm going to just ask, there's 2 questions that have been presented here, and they're basically in the same area, so I'm just going to ask you to do this, and maybe Greg, you could be first to answer. Should the BCA take responsibility for maintaining, preserving, and restoring our forested land in common areas, parks, and privately held property? What's your thought about the forested land?
Could you give a little more description of what you mean by privately held property?
Well, that's what someone said. Whoever submitted this, what is the, I think that they're, I won't say.
Well, let me,
It was my question, and
Okay.
my concern is for, not for the BCA to tell people what to do on their property, but to provide guidance on what essentially what the forested makeup of this community should be. And certainly in common areas and in park-like settings, the BCA can control what happens there. Can they provide guidance to folks who does anybody want to come in and take down every tree on their property without an encouragement to reforest or to maintain that, the natural setting?
I got you now. Thank you for that extra. The common areas, forested common areas of Brander Mill, its greatest asset. When you look at any other community, really, almost across the United States, there's very few planned communities that have what Brander Mill has, to the extent that it does. And that common area has lost some of its luster and some of its quality over the 50 years or so that it's been here. So I do think there's a responsibility for the board to think about how that is properly maintained and established for generations in the future. We don't want to keep seeing that downgraded in any way. So the comparison then to your private lands. If you've seen my video, I talk about the importance for myself to get my yard back to more of a native plant habitat and remove all the grass. One, I started to realize in living in Brander Mill how much noise there is from all the leaf blowing. Whew. Sometimes of the year you just want to go outside and you want to put headphones on inside. So I'm going to stop adding to that noise factor. I'm not going to mow grass and I'm not going to blow leaves except off my driveway with an electric blower. Okay? Anything I can do to improve the status quo. But a native plant habitat where you actually allow the leaves to fall and not have to be blown off the ground. I mean, all of those practices actually hurt the quality of your soil and ultimately how your trees are growing on your property. But I've said in my video, it's not to be mandated. I want to set a personal example and start sharing that more and more and to see if we actually have just a natural upswell of citizens who say, I like that model better than mowing and blowing and distributing fertilizers and so forth, because all that's going to eventually get in the lake. So I think we can do better in terms of taking care of our common areas, and I think we can promote a better story for residents who decide that maybe over-maintaining their properties isn't the route they want to go, but not to shame anybody, because it's a free world and it's their castle. That's kind of where I stand.
You want to add something, Tony?
Yeah, I think unless things have changed, say I built my house in 81, 82, I mean, the BCA came out and we tagged all the trees we thought we needed to remove, and there were still a bunch of trees left on our property. So I assume the policy is still the same. You just can't go in and cut all the trees down on your property and then build a house, and then maybe replant trees. In regards to the common areas, I would tend to agree with a lot of what Greg said, that when you drive up Charter Colony Parkway and you see what H.H. Hunt did, well, the people who developed Brander Mill told me there was no way they could build that community for the dollar amount that H.H. Hunt was going to use, because of how they tried to be somewhat ecologically sensitive. Keep a lot of trees. We're the Hilton Head, Sea Pines model. Tons of trees. As Greg said, most of the communities have no trees. I just think, possibly the BCA maybe needs a better job, or do a better job maybe, of maintaining some of that, where people can walk through some of that. Selected bike trails, perhaps. Just my 2 cents.
You want to add anything, Anderson?
Yeah, a couple of things I wanted to make sure I addressed that I think I had heard, which were standardization. And if you're looking at private property versus common versus what's in Brander Mill versus what's adjacent, I think I see a large mixture of different types of plants and trees that are out there. For example, we know bamboo is very invasive. I think at some point in time it was trendy and maybe people liked for how quick it grows and provides privacy. But long term, it's not the most healthy native grass or tree or plant for your area, right? So it's kind of hard to enforce on someone to clear that out. It's almost impossible to get rid of bamboo, right? It is what it is. But, from my personal experience, I purchased my property And after my inspection and a week later moving in, a large tree had fallen, and I thought it was common ground, and I got a nice little letter from the BCA, my very first welcome, that said, hey, you gotta clean up this tree. And that's how I learned my property is much bigger than I thought it was. I actually don't have common ground behind me. And what was interesting is the way that it's been non-maintained by previous owners in the long term, it's kind of been overgrown. It's unsightly. And I know that because there's lots of dog owners that need to walk through my property. But at the same time, I recognize that that's a sense of pride of ownership. What can you choose to do with that property? What's low maintenance? What's your availability? And of course, we also have to consider the financial implications of that as well. So I think there's two elements. If we're talking about standardization, that also comes with the ownership of, well, if you can't plant this tree because it's not native, it doesn't support, to Greg's point, what's the best thing for the health of the environment? Then Brandonville's got to probably set a tone for what is the investment for that. Now, I'll caveat all that to say I've been working with the Virginia Conservancy myself. I want to make sure that the decisions I'm making work the best ecologically. I also want to protect the reservoir. I want to protect the integrity of the trees. I have a ivy problem. They climb up the trees, they choke the tree then falls. It's a very healthy, beautiful thing, provides shade, it's home to the nature that's around, and unfortunately it can be compromised. So I think we have to define what is healthy, what's unhealthy, what's native, what's not native. And I think we should apply those standards that apply to all. But of course, we have to do that in a well-calculated way. So I don't think it's a short-term decision that can be made. It requires some thought, but I'm very open to the idea of working with everyone collectively.
Tony, this was addressed to you, but I think everyone has an opportunity to respond. You mentioned the need to upgrade and restore aging infrastructure, both elements that we control and those that we don't. Be more specific about what needs to be done and how to do it.
In my neighborhood in the last 2 years, there's been 2 water line breaks. Now, they're only 45 to 50 years old. I don't know what the natural life expectancy of sewer lines, water service is, but I do know in the past 20 years, that's the third. 2 water mains broke, one of which caused significant damage to the next circle up. So things like that need to be looked at. The second thing is something that I wanted to address, and that's more the county utilities department. The second thing in terms of infrastructure is some areas in Brandonville have natural gas, others do not. I looked at it 25 years ago, trying to get natural gas before I was on the board. And it was a long, drawn-out process. But the gas company does have a thing called the line extension program, which is a way that they help subsidize to add gas lines to areas that don't have it. I don't know the exact number of places in Brandonville that don't, but I think a lot of them north of Genito Road have gas there, whether they come down into their neighborhoods, different issue. A couple places by the country club have gas. There's Muirfield Green Condos, I believe may have gas. But the bottom line is something like that to look at. Is this something we want in Brandon? But as I said, a lot of the sewer stuff's water service is now near 50 years old. Is that going to have to be replaced? That I don't know the answer. Whether the community even wants gas. Because gas may be out in 20 years. At the time I first looked at it in the 90s, gas was somewhat expensive. But my electric bill, everybody's electric bill just continued to march forward. I can't have solar in my house because I have too many trees. I tried to get solar 20 years ago, 10 years ago, 3 years ago. So we're going to live with electric, and most of us are going to live with electric and maybe gas. That was what I meant by that.
Any other comments, Greg?
You should go round robin, so I'm gonna let Anderson go.
I'm one of the lucky few that has natural gas, so sorry, Mike. Well, you're welcome to come over anytime. In general, I think the idea about infrastructure is something that should be visited. I think we all know that one of the downsides to having a lot of trees is root damage. It can disrupt concrete and disrupt piping, whether that's for irrigation or it could be for plumbing. In previous homes that I've owned, I've had to deal with those problems with roots being invasive and, of course, seeking out water, especially in times of drought. And I don't think a lot of properties in Brandonville have irrigation, and I think also due to the trees, there's not a lot of grass that can grow in some yards, some areas, because of just the way that water consumption happens naturally. But to the point of infrastructure, I think if we can partner with the county, partner with the groups that can help provide better infrastructure, routine inspection should be a thing if it's not already happening. The age of the development definitely warrants wanting to have it to be safe. No one wants to be without power, without clean water, without any type of the amenities and utilities that are equitable for all. I think everyone here is probably on the same page for that. And at the same time, I want to be very sensitive to, well, does putting something in mean the cost of something else? What do we have to lose in order to gain something? So the benefits must outweigh the lack of benefit, and we have to make sure that the pros and the cons are heavily weighed. But I'm all for people getting the best resource available to them. I think it's much more affordable to use natural gas for certain heating elements. I think equipment that you have in your home is easier to replace when it's gas rather than electric. And of course, we want to be very sensitive about how do we consume these natural resources as a people in general. You know, it's hard to get approval for solar because we love the trees. We don't want to take down the trees. And at the same time, that would be a very effective thing, especially as we try to maintain our own costs and our expenses. Everyone has a different reason for wanting to save money, and I think all of them are valid. So I'm all for making sure inspections happen and that we're all on the same page for the best way to create that equitable living experience. Because it's also big resale, it's big for long-term sustainability of living in your home, and those are all things I'm very passionate about.
Okay, well, I guess I see the infrastructure as kind of different components. Brandonville's infrastructure is comprised of its pools, Sunday Park, the pathways, anything that basically is the full and only responsibility of the BCA to be managing and providing for its residents and possibly its business members. So when we look at those things, and this has been a frustration for a lot of people, as they've seen assessments rise. There were a lot of years where the board didn't take advantage of doing the annual 5% assessment. It's kind of like a young person starting to work and they think, oh, I'll put off saving for retirement until later. And before you know it, they're 55 and they realize they have no retirement and they're all of a sudden chunking all their money into a retirement fund. Well, there were a number of years where Brandonville didn't raise their assessments and didn't put that aside in an interest-bearing type account for the rainy days that were coming when our infrastructure started failing. This building was failing, literally going to collapse. We had to replace it. I wasn't on the board, I wasn't even a resident in here at the time those decisions were made, but I understand why they were made. Because we have a liability and responsibility to make sure that our facilities are safe and that they are providing benefits that we're all paying dues for. So, yeah, hopefully I answered the question about those infrastructure issues.
Okay, I'm going to say, we don't have a whole lot of time, but so if there's someone from the audience that has a specific question that you want to ask,
I do. I don't know if I knew that.
you probably don't need that.
I have a question. Okay, I'll get to it here. Humor me, just an observation as well as a comment, and then a question that may provoke some discussion. Okay. Observations. I haven't heard anyone in your explanation or your motivation for being board members about the glamorous compensation package.
Yeah, well paid.
Not a little bit? No. Observation, or the comment is, in your 5-minute videos, I did view them, them all. There are two things. one which we just began to get close to here, and that was a comment with respect to the age of the community. Okay? We have to acknowledge that. It's not fun, but it's true. I mean, it's not an old Zion, but it's got a lot of miles on it here. And we've got a lot of competition from a housing standpoint in our immediate area. We've got to remain competitive. We can't just rely, of course, I don't believe, on everyone loves the reservoir, everyone loves the pools, we love the trees, we love the puppies. I think it's got to have more shareholder value in it, for someone making a home purchase than something else. So that age, we've got to, I think, continue to have an ongoing renewal kind of mentality with our operation and management of the community. And that's just a generic, point, but we make that. Two is I haven't heard the word, but I have heard it in the community. And I did hear it in one of the videos about the NRC. Okay, I know it's a hypothetical. We don't have an NRC right now. Oh, I'm sorry. I'm going to stop myself. Back to the trees. I've been a 25-year resident here. I have 25 grand in removing trees. I love them, but there's nothing. But the NRC, we had NRC in the community at one point. It was abandoned, abolished. I should know the answer to this question. I don't. Okay. But the whole concept of that's very, intriguing to return. If nothing else, it seems like it would be a vehicle by which we get more community engagement. You don't want to get over-engaged, but I think we want more engagement than we have. And we have more people go to monthly board meetings.
So why don't we just start with Anderson? Do you want to address the issue of the neighborhood rep council that we had at one time? Is that what you would like to have him do?
Just with this kind of, just let that get down to about 2012 level. How would you implement that? Okay. How is it like the Senate where every neighborhood gets 2 senators, how would you get selected there? What's the basic authority level and the responsibilities of an NRC?
I'll start, and I'll say I love the idea of an NRC. I'm an extroverted person, so I'm energized by working with people, and I want to learn who my neighbors are, and that's been a very rewarding thing about living in Brandermill. So first, I want to clarify before that. I think that's great. I think one of the things that's hard to adopt and is a challenge to try to implement is representation from each neighborhood is going to vary by the size of the neighborhood, and some neighborhoods will have to probably inherit a smaller adjacent one if they don't have a representative or someone else that would be willing to do it, because again, I believe it has the same compensation package as the board. Very handsome benefits. And that being said, the idea about bringing the community together, I'm all for it. Because once we know each other, we're more sensitive and tolerant, and it also provides a great forum to communicate about what do you think about this tree, this common ground, about the access, so we can be more equitable with how we share our knowledge with one another. Now, at the same time, I think implementation comes from a list of first, who's willing to volunteer? Are you willing to also accept that there are people who choose to be private and don't necessarily sign up by moving to Brandermill to be part of an NRC or be part of that? So I want to be aware of that. And at the same time, I think the best thing for what Brandermill can do as a community to reinforce an NRC to go up, or to reinforce the idea that you're talking about, whether it's resale value or the value of how we are seen as a community, is to constantly be challenging the idea of what is valuable at that time. And for example, I've seen certain playgrounds, right? That's for younger families. However, younger families are moving here. If that's a value add, same thing with pools or certain other amenities, that's of interest. At the same time, you want to drive through the community and you want it to feel like a place that you want to live. And these neighboring developments that are going up are challenging that notion. The clear cutting, I'm not a fan of. I think that's gross. And when I look at what else is going up, property value hopefully is going to increase, which is great, but that's also going to mean congestion on our roads, people cutting through to get to neighborhoods that are behind us. So I think that there is a need for investment in what makes our neighborhood attractive, that should modernize itself generationally. And we have to hear what people are seeking out, these new homeowners are seeking out, and what are these current owners are willing to sell their properties for, what are they trying to get, so that we can constantly be investing into what are the best features of the community. You're right, the reservoir sells itself. The trails are there, we're not gonna get rid of them. The trees are beautiful, and we hope that they continue to replenish themselves. And at the same time, we need to think about, well, what aren't we thinking about today? Is it, simple lighting so that it's safer to drive around at night? We've heard of some terrible accidents that have happened. We want people to feel safe, walking certain trails, you want them to be clear, you want trash cans to be maintained as they are. So I think all those things are great points, and I hope that we continue to address them.
Great.
Thank you, Brian. Thank you first for watching the videos. It takes some time. I was the person who said yes on the video, I want to bring back the NRC or something of that nature. Because as I've talked to committee members and board members, I get the sense that they feel a lack of informing and guidance from residents. They only have their select few of friends. They want to hear from a broader perspective, especially outside of their own neighborhoods. So having that broader participation of less involved but nevertheless caring residents that want to make sure our community grows and is maintained well, informing the board, guiding the board is an important aspect. In terms of the competition of our neighborhood with others, we need to think about the fact that we are the ones who actually have something unique to sell. All the other neighborhoods are a lot more cookie cutter than Brandon Mill will ever become, okay? So we want people who want to live in the woods. We want people who like to get out and walk their dogs or themselves. We want people who care about the native environment we have here and we want to project more of it, even perhaps on their property. So I don't want to compete with someone who wants to just say, cut down all the trees and make me like Charter Colony, okay? And so that's the perspective, but in terms of implementing, I do think that's something we have to do carefully, and I agree with you, Anderson, that some neighborhoods are so small, they may need to partner. And how the rules are set up is, again, something that I think a candidate necessarily can't just jump in and say, we're going to do it this way. Transparency is about let's seeing how we can do this effectively and long-term so it doesn't get abandoned.
The NRC probably disbanded sometime around 2014, 2015. 1 or 2 years before that, the Village Mill, which was our bi-weekly newspaper, kind of ceased to exist. In its heyday, the NRC probably had 80% of the neighborhoods in Brandonville represented. I think there's like 90, 88, 90 neighborhoods in Brandonville. So there was about 70, 75 people. And the NRC literally were the boots on the ground. When you wanted to get a referendum passed, an amendment passed, the proponents of the amendment could go to the NRC and could have 70 or 80 people, of whom 65 would agree, and they would go out and talk to their neighbors about it. They're the people that are meant to give the board ideas. We haven't had that for 8, 9 years. Who makes up the NRC? The people that took the time to come to this meeting may become the reps for their neighborhoods. It sounds like all 3 of the candidates up here are in favor of having an NRC reactivated. It'll become a board decision. Hopefully, the board will say, yes, we'll give it a try again. Then we're going to need people like you to volunteer, or people who come to the meetings. We had a meeting a month and a half ago. I see some of the similar people. There were about 50 people at that meeting. They're the people that would make up the NRC. some communities, some neighborhoods will never have a member of the NRC just because of the nature of people living there. But I think it really is a good idea. It's a sounding board for ideas. They used to run to meet the candidates. It had a much more home feel. Didn't have the us versus them atmosphere that maybe we've seen in Brandon over the last 5 or 10 years. Life is more complex. Things seem a lot more impersonal. In regards to infrastructure and things, this building is an example. None of these communities can compete with Brandon. We have a lake. We have people that are concerned about detrimental things happening to the lake. And bike trails need to be refurbished, and they are on a fairly regular basis. We got 23 miles of bike trails. Maybe we need a few more. Certainly, it sounds like a few more leading to the waterfront so people can get there more easily.
I mean, just, yeah, I see your hand, just one moment. It's almost 7 o'clock. So I think we're gonna end here shortly, but I'll take a couple more questions here. If you have a question, the audience. Start, Greg, if you have one to ask, go ahead.
Yes, there's a lot to know if you're on the board. We have several board members here, one former board member, several committee members who have been activating themselves in the process. And there are covenants, bylaws, written policies, written procedures, everything you could think of with all this history that's hanging out there. So my question is, let's assume you decided on January 1 that you might want to be on the board. What have you done to begin educating yourself in terms of meetings and, thanks, in terms of meetings and documents to be better prepared when you get on the board rather than spending 6 months to a year learning all the stuff that you didn't know before you got on?
Okay.
Whose turn is it?
Greg, it's your turn.
Is it my turn?
Who spoke first?
Okay, so when I did make the decision, it was to become a candidate. It was in December of last year. And so at that point, I started attending some of the committee meetings and board meetings. I can't say that I've sat in every one, but I have tried to sit in every one that I could. And some of the committees have even said, what are your thoughts? So they actually allowed me to have some moment there. And it wasn't about me being a candidate, it was about giving the experience that I have to the group. So I feel like I do know every committee. I'm starting to know the people on every committee. And in fact, when we talk about that infrastructure, there's no better way to start seeing the interconnectivity between all those committees and FSR when you start talking about our infrastructure, because they're all totally engaged in finding solutions. In terms of the covenants and our bylaws, yes, I have read those. I don't have them in my memory yet, like I do the Chesterfield County zoning ordinance, which I implemented for 30 years and actually wrote a lot of it. So I'm very comfortable with, thankfully, these documents are smaller than Chesterfield County zoning ordinance.
Tony?
Well, I only decided to run for the board March the 1st, maybe a little bit earlier, not many days earlier. But I was involved in the documents committee for 2 years, and I kind of have a pretty good understanding of the documents and the declarations and the covenants of the BCA. What I definitely have no firsthand knowledge of or understanding of as of right now is how the BCA and the staff at the office there and First Services all interact. That I do not know. If I get elected to the board, I'm quite sure I will learn it. I've attended sporadic meetings over the past 2 years of the board. I've participated in Member Voice. several times, sometimes to the end of the board, usually with a contrary opinion. That's my activity over the past, say, 2 years in regards to community affairs.
One of the first things I learned in life, my father taught me, which is you don't sign anything without reading it. So when I bought my house in Brandonville, the very first thing I did is learn there's an HOA. I went through the entire thing top to bottom. I know it might be hard to believe, but I wanted to know what I was getting into. And this is actually the first HOA I've ever lived with. Now, that being said, I familiarized myself with it from a general capacity, top to bottom, understand how design, maintenance, and of course certain ordinances when it comes to just living in the general area, what does that come with? So I'll say in terms of preparation, definitely been rereading it, as I'm also trying to think about what are some of the projects in my home that need to be engaged with the HOA on. And I will say, outside of Brandermill, what I do for work is actually have a contract manager and a process manager for a bank. It's a big bank here in Richmond, no free publicity. And working for them, I have to actually generalize myself and perfect a process of how to build a control, top to bottom, and of course, familiarize yourself with what terms need to be enforced in any certain circumstance. So I think my general practice is you don't commit to memory, top to bottom, everything that's in there, because then you are cheating yourself of learning other ideas that might be more important at that time. So what you do is you familiarize yourself with the language, you understand the term, you understand what supports that specific topic at that time. And then of course, you familiarize and refresh yourself ever so often to make sure that things are staying up to date and within reason of what's a good thing to be executed on. So I've been reading a lot of it more recently. I made a decision to run for the board beginning of February. And I've been attending meetings, same thing as the gentleman mentioned, sporadically every other month on average since moving here. And it was one of the highlights of the most recent rewrite conversations to see how it's also become very popular for other residents. It went from a very low participation to a, it's tripled in numbers. They went from like 10 other residents to 70 and 80 in some recent meetings. So familiarizing myself with the actual language, yes. Understanding best practices and how to use it and implement it in the future, yes. And gladly give it a reread as needed.
Take one more.
I actually have two questions, but I think they both can be answered briefly. The first one is, how do you guys feel about having board meetings in person, either occasionally or in a hybrid way that would potentially allow more people to attend? And the second one has to do with erosion and the extent to which you feel the BCA has a responsibility to deal with the clear erosion problem we have.
I am 100%, if I get on the board, I will vote 100% of the time to have open meetings with people in attendance. My understanding to have a dual modality meeting where it could be live streamed and also open. There were some cost issues. I heard there were cost issues, but I'm a big believer of the open meetings. I'm also a big believer when you have member voice, if you cannot give, because generally the board's not going to want to discuss right then and there when you bring up a member voice. Usually, that's what's happening. But the resident who brought the point up, certainly if they took the time to have a statement that they gave to the BCA in advance, should get a response to it. Maybe within 30 days. Just so you know somebody thought about it. The erosion problem, I assume, well, I'm not quite sure. Are you talking about all the silt and runoff from what they're building on Janito Road right now that is running from all the streams?
No, that's not erosion. I'm talking about losing shoreline in our common areas, our amenities. I'm talking about, you go to Sunday Park and there's no topsoil because everything's been running down the hill and scraping it bare. We need to, that's an area where Greg might understand, we need to naturalize some of those areas again so that the soil will be retained and we won't have, you know, basically dirt on that boardwalk there. So, but, you know, any of the areas we've been in, we're losing lots of shoreline every year, and there are ways in which we can deal with that if we simply accept that we need to implement those fixes.
Yeah, there was a tree planting there, 20, 25 years ago that I was involved in. And they put a memorial in for one of the young men that died in Afghanistan. And there was a lot of work done then, but probably very little has been done, I would assume, in the last 15, 18 years. And I apologize, the shoreline out here, honestly, I don't think that's changed in 15 or 20 years. The erosion, I think, is where the ground is a lot steeper, cutting into where the water is versus pretty much up and down here. It's relatively flat getting to.
I think you'd be shocked if you went to the landing or to Sunday Park to see just.
Well, Sunday Park, yeah, I've seen it, yeah. Yeah, because the ground's a lot higher there than when you come to the lake. Erosion's a much bigger issue in Woodland than over here, because the ground's a lot higher. But it is an issue.
For question number one, yes, love the idea of a hybrid meeting, love people in person. It's one of my favorite things is to interact with people face to face, and setting it up for a hybrid environment is great. That's also promoting accessibility. There are people who can't physically attend and they might want to. We don't want to exclude anyone from that. I'm all for that. In terms of the erosion, I'm 100% on board with trying to be proactive for the areas that need to be protected so that they don't erode, and correcting some of the things that have eroded away. I mentioned earlier my own property, I'm working with VCAP to help prevent the loss of soil. Yep, and they're a great program, and I highly encourage you looking into it if you believe that could be a challenge. Implementing native grasses, native plants, and increasing the natural beauty of what Virginia has to offer, which, by the way, is a astoundingly large number of plants that are beautiful that we can incorporate if we're not already doing it. I'm all for it. So I want to help protect the erosion. And again, this calls back to the question the other gentleman mentioned earlier, which is the way that we're going to protect Brander Mill's integrity long term is by making those investments now. You know, and I'll end it by saying the analogy of, you know, the best time to plant a tree is 20 years ago, the second best time is now. We should be taking that approach to a lot of what we do.
So I'm going to start with the erosion first. I'm aware of the erosion that's occurring in Sunday Park. I'm not as aware of all the places that might be along the shoreline, but that is the responsibility of Brander Mill, the BCA, to stop from happening and to reclaim it back into a more natural condition. So again, I'm not aware of all the places, but if I were elected onto the board, I would certainly want to become more aware of that. So what was the other question?
Open meetings.
Oh, the meeting. I favor the hybrid meetings because there are some people who just cannot get out and attend. But I definitely want the open meetings for the board. Now, whether committees start going to some type of opens, you know, that's a whole different discussion. I'll make sure that's often kind of kept separate. But there is a one-time cost for setting up the hybrid meetings and then having staff trained to understand how to do that. So my preference would be transparency of what the board does, even the communications after the board meeting, how we keep a recording of what goes on, you know, made available to our residents. I would prefer even a monthly reporting on the business of the BCA and highlights of FSR that could go out to the residents so that they can read in a kind of a one short document. If you've ever looked at the Washington Post and get their little thing that says, here's the 7 things you should have learned this week, okay? It's very informative. I don't read the whole Washington Post. I can just get the top 7 and I can say I'm up to speed. So yeah, these are good questions. Thank you.
Okay,
I'd like to share
gentlemen.
some. Could I share something? Did you I'm sorry. No, I
Like you did first. I just, to end on a positive note, I have to tell you that, anyway, I just met a woman who, she's only in her 50s, she's had cancer, she moved here. She looked at 36 houses. And she's not even here a year yet. And she said, I came to Brandonville. And it was like, yes. She liked the trees, she liked the paths, she loved the water. And she's not exactly on the water, but she said, wow, you know, she didn't want to be in one of these other neighborhoods. And it's because of who we are. And I met another woman who actually is in her 70s, going through cancer, had to move from Maine. And she looked in the city, she looked here, she looked there. She found this place here in Brandonville. It's like, oh, yes. You know, and it's hard and we have to keep it up. But this is like within the last month, you know, just happened to meet these ladies, one in her 70s, one in her 50s, and they just love it. And look at the sunset and they look at the trees and neither of them are right on the water, but they can get there. You know, they can get there.
I like to think one of the selling factors is I'm her neighbor.
Okay.
I just like to support what she's saying. So in Timber Ridge, just met a second time, but we've had two new families, one with their first child, the other one, both coming down from Northern Virginia, and waited until there was a house. That tells a story.
Okay, we're running kind of late here, about 7:13, whatever, and I'm going to ask that each of the gentlemen who are candidates for the board tell you why you should vote for them. I'm going to start with Anderson. Tell us why we should vote for you.
Thank you all for indulging us this evening, and thank you to the candidates for a wonderful conversation. I thoroughly enjoyed this entire process. I'd love for your consideration of your vote, as I'm heavily invested into being a strong part of what Brandonville could be for now and in the future. As I've echoed some of the statements a lot of you have shared, which is you are deeply passionate about your community and your neighbors. And if you ask any one of the people that I've been lucky enough to interact with, I'm passionate about those same things. I love a great committee, a good potluck. I love people coming together and being able to share their ideas. And at the same time, I also love a challenge that requires some knowledge, expertise, and dedication of your facility to be able to get it to the next chapter in its story. So I'm really invested in what that could be for the amenities. I'm really invested in what it could be for the residents. And I'm really invested into each and every one of you so that we have a forum and a place that's going to continue to make Brandonville home. And I think that's the overall arching theme of what everyone has shared. This is home. We are all very protective of home, and I'd love to protect it alongside you. Thank you.
Thank you.
So why I'm asking you to vote for me. When I came into this community and started reading Brandonville families and Brandonville residents and Brandonville community, Brandonville Timber Ridge, there's like so many social media outlets. And while there's a lot of good things, there's a lot of anger from segments within Brandonville. And I want to see that uplifted and changed. And so I truly believe in like full transparency in all that BCA and FSR does. But I also feel that FSR doesn't get the support that they need. We actually, you know, whether we hire our own staff or whether we hire an organization with their own staff, they're here basically every day working like paid employees should. We're not so small that this is some removed maintenance organization from North Carolina, okay, that is taking care of us. They are here and present, and they need our support. The board is the one that should properly guide and train and mentor them to serve the residents that are unique about Brandonville. So, you know, I met with the ARB the other day, and they allowed me to give some input. And I said, one of the best things you can do to stop ticking off the residents is add, instead of either approve or deny, and you know, a lot of people get the deny letter, talk about a mad resident, a deny letter. Instead, use something called revisions requested with what's wrong with the ramification, so that then they feel like they're still in the game, that they have potential to get something approved through the BCA or FSR, wherever you want to look at it. So FSR, they're trying to mold themselves, the way they work with Brander Mill, and right now we need really strong mentorship and guidance from the board so that they can succeed. They don't want to fail, they want to succeed. So I want to be part of that, because what I've always done for Chesterfield County was bring teams and committees and community meetings together to a positive solution. Thank you.
Thank you.
First of all, I think you have three good candidates up here. And I think whomever gets elected, if they stay close to what they stated tonight, and they have some influence on the board, maybe some improvements can be made in your eyes. Why you should vote for me, any more than any of the other two people? At this particular point, other than my knowledge of the overall history of Brander Mill and how we've gotten from point A to point B, that's a big point. I think you really can't know where you're going if you really don't know where you came from. I do agree that there is an us versus them mentality out there that was seen whenever we had a documents committee meeting for the public by the questions that were asked after the meeting. And hopefully, we can improve the transparency and the communications from the board to the residents. That the board is doing things that the residents do. But really to do that, you're going to need to have an organization like the NRC to give guidance to the board. The board then sets the tone, the agenda, and FSR are the ones that implement it. I want to thank all of you for attending tonight. And I'm quite sure all three of us will stay after the official meeting to answer any of your questions.
You just took my final words away. Thank you, gentlemen.